The TV Regent has always covered classics in all of its videos, but I've never really taken the term so literally that I made a whole video on them. Medieval era films and TV shows just have a completely different vibe to them, because they fit well within the isekai culture that's prevalent all over the world. However, I'm not here to talk about fantasy worlds, I want to cover badass battles.
Give them nothing, but take from them everything!
That's why I've decided to give you my top 25 badass medieval age battles in films and TV. The hype around Exodus, Gods and Kings was pretty big, especially considering the cast, but historical inaccuracies ended up costing this film a successful run at the box office. Anyway, Ridley Scott has been directing movies for longer than I've been alive, so it's safe to say that the visuals on this film were amazing. Let's kick things off with the Battle of Kadesh, shall we? It starts on a high note with all the horses charging like there's no tomorrow, and then we obviously get to see both Moses and Ramesses doing their thing. What really works for this scene is that it's not necessarily a one-sided affair. Ramesses was actually pretty close to meeting his end, but thank God for Christian Bale, who still had his Batman training fresh in his mind. Having said that, I preferred Ramesses when it comes to battle styles, because that guy knows how to pull off a smooth attack. There were some nice subtleties as well, with arrows deflecting off armor, which is exactly what should happen in an actual battle. Also, I know Ridley Scott's Napoleon is his latest release, but I haven't seen the film yet, so it wouldn't be fair for me to include it on this list. The best part about covering ancient eras is that you can explore a lot more areas. In the case of 2022's Medieval, we're looking at the life of Jan Žižka, a Bohemian military commander who was known for never losing a battle. We see his exploits soon enough when he and his men fight back against the ambush of their carriage. Of course, this is yet another one of those sequences where the soldiers are all wearing their armor properly, but nobody puts on a helmet. Like, I get you want some screen time, but this is exactly why the public criticizes movies for not being accurate. Anyway, I found this battle particularly raw and gory because of how straightforward it is. Sure, the winning side also has to deal with severe injuries, but it's the win that matters and nothing else. I'll admit that the most badass aspect about this scene is the part where they push a horse, and there's a lot of doubt regarding the credibility of the action as well, but it was a pretty solid offering overall. Also, it's nice to see Michael Caine still flexing his acting muscles whenever he can. Bro just doesn't know when to quit. I've always been a fan of Mila Jovovich, primarily because of her role as Alice in the Resident Evil franchise. However, she's also made a name for herself in a plethora of other roles, and Joan of Arc is one of them. If you're unaware, Joan of Arc's probably the most popular French female soldier. She was a true badass, and her contributions made a huge difference to the reign of King Charles VII. Of course, the lore behind the way in which she had to meet her end was pretty brutal, but at least she's respected now. Now, the movie didn't exactly live up to the legacy she'd created for herself, but I gotta say, the scale of the battles in this film were truly top-notch. Take the moment where the English opposition's base is completely overtaken by Joan and her men. Naturally, since this is a film about the war between the English and the French, you're bound to see a fight scene between those sides. Now, there's a sense of urgency in what Joan plans for her enemies, and the plan works to perfection, especially with the final onslaught. If you can get your opposition panicking like the way they are here, you surely deserve to be celebrated as an S-tier fighter. The sequence may seem messy at first, but that's the whole intention, because it was this impulsive strategy that actually helped the French come out on top. With the massive success of 300, you'd imagine the sequel would set box office records just like Gerard Butler's most iconic film. Of course, making almost $350 million isn't a small amount, but with the production and marketing costs, I guess it just wasn't meant to be. Ideally, it would have been great to see Zack Snyder returning for Rise of an Empire, but that dude has his own set of creative rules, so I ain't gonna argue with that. Alright, let's look at the shot combat scene, which I feel is the highlight of the movie. I'm not saying this scene is 100% accurate, or that it portrays the complex political struggles and conflicts of the time, but the background score and the artistic style is epic. Themistocles is so bold and courageous throughout the entire sequence that he almost instantly established himself as a worthy successor to Leonidas. It was a great way to kick off the film, and hearing Eva Green's beautiful voice against the backdrop of this battle was a nice little cherry on the cake. The action, choreography and general tone of the scene did feel appropriate for a sequel to 300, but how the heck does our hero go about slashing opponents left, right and centre without even wearing full body armour? Like, we get it bro, you work out. Honestly though, they should change his name from Themistocles to the Testicles. Man, this has got to be one of the most impactful scenes from a film set in ancient times. So by now you should have realised that most movies within this genre are not known for being historically accurate, but I can let that pass if they at least manage to entertain me. Now, this isn't to say that I enjoy watching massacres of this scale on a daily basis, but Kingdom of Heaven gave us something special with the attack on Jerusalem. There's so much happening all at the same time, and as expected, the bodies pile up like crazy. The best part is obviously when backup arrives at the right time, and with a renewed sense of confidence, we see Balian taking the lead and dominating the enemy. Bro really stood on a pile of bodies while taking the life of one more soldier. With the weaponry and fire stunts on display, I think it's safe to say that a lot of work went into this production process, and credit needs to be given to the crew members who were able to pull off something so grand. Man, I wonder what Orlando Bloom's up to nowadays. Bro started dating Katy Perry and just vanished from the scene. If we're to look back on all the leaders of the ancient eras, there's one name that always stands out: Genghis Khan. Bro conquered so many kingdoms and women that roughly 16 million dudes today are his actual descendants. Well, I'm not here to talk about his lack of control over his intrusive thoughts. I'm going to cover an epic battle scene from 2007's Mongol. The fight in question is between Genghis Khan and Jamuka, and oh boy, the visuals here are sick AF. First of all, the elite troops look like they're riding straight out of hell. Even the horses look scary here. On top of that, the way these soldiers slashed through the enemy right from the start was a brilliant strategy. It helped them gain an instant advantage and also minimized casualties from their end. Basically, this was a nice way to showcase the ruthless leader's natural knack for leading the charge. I'll admit that the friendly fire towards the end of the battle was a bit controversial, but hey, we got a nice shot out of it. Speaking of which, the cinematography here is S-tier stuff. This sequence was definitely executed with a lot of practical effects, so for the cameramen to get each and every shot so perfectly clear was great work. I wonder if Genghis Khan rewarded them for their efforts too. I was talking about historical inaccuracies not too long ago, and this movie here is probably the leader when it comes to that aspect. 1995's Braveheart was a critical and commercial success, thanks in large part to the lead character Sir William Wallace and the overall direction, both of which were executed by Mel Gibson. You could even say that Braveheart was his magnum opus, and there are lots of battles from this film to consider for this list. For now, I'm going to stick to the Battle of Falkirk, where betrayal is the primary theme on display. Don't get me wrong, the fight's pretty violent and brutal, but the reason why this encounter sticks out is because it hurts to see your own comrade stab you in the back. That too, at such a crucial moment in the battle. The most emotional section has got to be when Wallace sees Robert fighting alongside the Longshanks, and you can sense the hurt in his heart from his expressions. All those knights couldn't do anything to Wallace, but that one face reveal was more than enough to leave a dejected look on his face. Yep, this has got to be one of the best betrayal scenes in history. No overly dramatic speech, not even a single word exchange, just complete heartbreak and resignation. Braveheart came in at close to 3 hours long, and Spartacus goes beyond that benchmark, and it just goes on to show that historical epics need time to flesh out their intricate storylines. Of course, Spartacus was directed by the legendary Stanley Kubrick, so it comes as no surprise that the film set the tone for the genre, especially when it came to managing the production process for the extended battle scenes. Not only did Spartacus win multiple Oscars, Kubrick also found a way to manage the huge amount of extras with a unique numbering system that most film studios still use till not long ago. Take the battle between Spartacus and Crassus. Just look at the number of extras that are actively fighting here. Remember, this is 1960, which is over 63 years ago, so for something to be made on such a scale was considered impossible at the time. The whole idea of this scene is to showcase the power of independent thought, and it comes through beautifully. Kirk Douglas does a great job with the acting, but kudos to Kubrick for pulling off the greatest battle scene in film history at that point. I know he distanced himself from this film because of the creative differences he had with the script, but even then, this one's a bona fide classic. A lot of these movies are underrated gems, save for the classics like Braveheart and Spartacus, but Outlaw King is a bit of a dicey situation because it's a Netflix production, so you can't really quantify if it made good on its budget, which was a whopping $120 million. Anyway, the Battle of Loudon Hill in particular really impressed me because of its strategic flow. For starters, I'm glad Outlaw King actually uses archers the way they should be used against armoured knights. You got to shoot horizontally and at close range for maximum penetration, you know. I think what really stood out here was the way they managed to deceive the enemy by making them walk straight into their trap. This is yet again a typical case of leading the enemy to their downfall. It just goes on to show that it doesn't matter how powerful your opponent might be, everyone has a weakness. Like, the scene was grand enough as it is, but to lay out those spikes at the perfect spot was a stroke of genius.
Take the day!
We have Magneto making an entry here, but as his alter ego Michael Fassbender in 2010's Centurion. Well, the universe may be different, but the intentions sure are the same. The battlefield scene has got to be one of the craziest fights I've ever seen, regardless of the era. There's so much blood and gore on display that I almost felt sick to my stomach at one point. Basically, it's exactly what Magneto would do if he wasn't stuck in a PG-13 X-Men film. Seriously though, these guys aren't holding back one bit, and it's only fair because that's an accurate representation of war. Now, Centurion is based on a story from the Roman Empire, and I really like the detailing that went into this film, particularly the use of the gladius. This is because the Romans did indeed use swinging motions with the gladius back in the day. During the Macedonian Wars, the Greek casualties of battle were described as having their limbs almost hacked off, although piercing wounds were also mentioned. The point being that the Romans used their swords to both thrust and slash their opponents, which is exactly what's shown in this fight scene. You gotta love a movie that uses practical effects for their animals. Yeah, I know that CGI might be the easier way out, but sometimes you need to give that sense of originality. Like, what's more badass than riding a whole army of elephants and taking on your opponents in the middle of the jungle? Now, just to be clear for anyone wondering, this scene isn't a direct one for retelling, but rather a culmination of Alexander's time in India. For example, during this battle, he did have his oldest men in the front, with some of them even being in their 70s because they were the most battle-hardened of them all. He may not have gotten speared through the chest in his battle, but that did happen at a later date when he was trying to breach a castle. Trying to sum up a vast story in one movie is a colossal task, so even if it's not completely accurate per se, it's still an authentic and faithful retelling. Another reason why I love this scene is that it really captures the mystery that India was to the old Western powers. They didn't know much about it, save for a few inside sources, and it shows.
Recruitment in circle!
Well, how about that? Joan of Arc manages to spring up 2 entries on the same list. Of course, stuff like this isn't uncommon in the world of TV Regent, so I'll just continue with my appraisal of this scene. It's basically when Joan and her French army decide to use ladders against the English to gain the upper hand. As expected, we're treated to yet another masterclass of a sequence as Joan's men give the Brits a run for their money. Of course, there's the usual slashing and other stuff too, but using the ladder strategy was a genius move. It's funny how both the scenes from this film have the enemy panicking and trying to use last-minute measures to try and keep their opponents at bay. This scene was really important because it also allowed Joan to shine through with her impeccable battle tactics. This proves why Joan was such a feared warrior, and even though I personally don't like Mila Jovovich being shown with a boy cut, I still can't undermine what she does here as Joan. I mean, when you've got so many people attacking each other at the same time, it takes a special kind of leader who's able to see their plan through right till the end. Well, here's a unique story. You've got Channing Tatum playing a serious role and a battle against a tribe of weird seal people. 2011's The Eagle had an interesting premise which was once again let down due to historical errors and misrepresentation. Luckily, I'm not a fact checker, so we can safely enjoy the epic final battle of the movie without any stress. The background score was a nice little touch and the overall fighting styles on display were pretty brutal if you ask me. Like, I'm not one to judge on how you like to throw hands, but those seal people look like they didn't really need any spears or other weapons. I particularly like the whole idea of covering a group of fighters who'd gone missing, and to see them battling tribal folk like these guys almost gave it a horror movie vibe. Marcus drowning the opposition leader might have been a bit anticlimactic, but seeing that makeup come off was probably scarier than anything else in this scene. I'm so happy that I chose this topic for today because my research led me to some gems that are mostly forgotten on a global level. 2018's The Great Battle had a decent outing in South Korea, but the same can't be said about the international audience members. Anyway, that doesn't take anything away from this brilliant war film, and if you want to look at large-scale battles, then look no further than the first fight scene. This moment had one simple intention: set up the film's key themes, and it did that with ease. It's got all the makings of a billion-dollar blockbuster, and the choreography was so nicely executed that it kept me hooked right until the very end. I can't even imagine being a soldier in ancient times like this, because just imagine thousands upon thousands of soldiers facing off in an up-close battle with each other. Those on the front line were surely marked for a brutal death, and of course the losing side was almost always wiped out completely. Apart from a few odd moments where the soldiers weren't wearing the kind of armor necessary for a battle of this scale, the overall execution was pretty neat, because I can promise you one thing: it must have been a pain to shoot. I'm not too sure what the general consensus might be on King Arthur, but for a movie that was released in 2004, the colour grading was freaking amazing. It truly felt like one of those high-quality European films, but from the ancient ages. As far as the final battle scenes against the Saxon army goes, it was executed in pretty impressive fashion. You can see what's happening, and you're able to follow the main characters throughout the battle, which is something that big-budget movies usually fall short on. Those battles might be bigger, but the shots feel so random at times. If you look at the way they get the job done here, you could say that King Arthur and his men were like the Navy SEALs of today. Of course, there are a few missteps here as well, such as throwing your primary weapon at the enemy before you can even reach them, but that can be ignored if you look at the final result. Okay, it looks like Alexander's also made the cut to have 2 entries from the same film on this list. He gets extra credits for breaking into my top 10 though. The desert fight scene has got to be one of the most intense and realistic fights I've ever seen. You must have noticed that I've been placing a lot of emphasis on historical accuracies and battle tactics throughout this video. That's because realism plays a huge role in finding appeal, even if we know the world of cinema is just one big fantasy. Personally, I feel that this film succeeds in warfare quality in terms of intensity, gore, tactics, strategy, accuracy, and timelines. Okay, I just realised that I put a lot of stuff in there at the same time, but can you blame me? Huge shout out to Colin Farrell for playing his role to the T. You can sense genuine bloodlust from this dude. This movie just came and went, but after I saw the cast, I was a bit surprised that nobody really spoke about it as much. I mean, you've got Timothée Chalamet and Robert Pattinson in this film, both of whom are pretty solid names. One dude's dating Kylie Jenner, and the other dude's freaking Batman. Well, I can't really use those points as justifications because these men are stuck in an intense battle where we finally get to see soldiers taking each other on in full body armour. The director here wanted to highlight the torment of war in particular, which is why the scene never shows the English overpowering the French or vice versa. Rather, it shows fathers, husbands and sons being slaughtered in the mud, both French and English. It showed horses, just animals with no understanding of political conflict, being stabbed to death. This movie wasn't meant to tell the story of a king, but show the true nature of war. Damn, I got a bit carried away there with that one.
On me!
I did mention that this list would contain scenes from the movies as well as TV shows, so here's Game of Thrones in all of its glory. The Battle of Blackwater is the first time where we get to see some real action in terms of an all-out battle, and leading this onslaught was Stannis Baratheon, who, if you come to think of it, is actually a pretty badass fighter. The fact that he nearly won this battle was straight up a thing of miracles. Using wildfire right from the start was a genius move, and Stannis made sure to make the use out of the night's darkness. Of course, it's Tywin who manages to turn the tables and take the W, but make no mistake, everyone from his side was in a spot of bother for the most part. The way Stannis keeps telling his soldiers to stand and fight, even after he knows the odds aren't in his favour, is one of the most heroic, badass things anyone's ever done. Well, this is another Ridley Scott film, so you can expect the historians to already start throwing up wherever they are. That man obviously doesn't care for their criticisms because he can make any scene look grandiose, and that's exactly what he sets out to do here as well. So yeah, trying to look past some very obvious errors in this film because the action choreography is what stands out the most. The opening beach battle in 2010's Robin Hood was something straight out of a fantasy novel. The highlight of the scene has got to be the onslaught of arrows that take down a lot of the opposition soldiers before they even reach the shore. The more I think about the plot of this film, the more I'm convinced that they essentially wanted to make a mix of Braveheart, Gladiator, and Saving Private Ryan. You can try and pull him down as much as you want, but Ridley Scott will keep coming back at you with more historical epics. It's actually frightening to see how many films he has under this genre because he's dominated this video with ease. And his best films like Alien and Blade Runner don't even qualify here. Anyway, looking back at this opening battle scene from Gladiator, I can surely say that it was a fiery exchange. What I like about this moment is that even though we know Maximus is a great individual fighter, in this battle he saves other soldiers from a killer blow and also gets saved by one. Later on in the movie, when he's in the Colosseum, he tells the other gladiators they'll have a better chance of surviving if they stick together. It really hits home that he knows no person stands alone and needs allies to win. He's a hero, but not the one-man army Hollywood usually loves. It's also kind of funny to see Russell Crowe dominate the scene though. It is his movie after all. Damn, we've got yet another entry coming in from the eastern side of the world. I'm surprised I haven't given this scene as much love as it rightfully deserves. Asian cinema usually has my approval, whether it's got something to do with martial arts or, more recently, zombie flicks. However, 2016's The Great Wall gave us fight sequences so grand and impactful that even Hollywood blockbusters would fall short in front of it. Just look at the cast, for crying out loud. There's Matt Damon, Pedro Pascal, William Dafoe, and my sweetheart, the ridiculously gorgeous Xing Tian. Yeah, call me a simp if you want. I've learned to live with my intrusive thoughts. Romantic thoughts. As far as the battle goes, I can best sum it up by saying meteorite monsters who arrive once every 60 years are here to wreak havoc, and the Nameless Order does their best to stop them. Jing Tian plays Commander Lin, who leads a super badass crane troop, and we also get to see William and Pedro using their skills to take down 2 monsters. I think they're called Tao Tai for the record. I also want to point out that the CGI used for these monsters is pretty damn good. Where the heck are these VFX artists when you need them in America, eh? Anyway, the action sequences here are top notch, which is why it finds itself in my top 5. This film just had to occupy one of the top spots, so here it is at number 4. The primary battle scene actually has Achilles watching from the sidelines for the most part, and the fact that the encounter was so thrilling even without him says a lot about the caliber of the director. The sequence greatly highlighted the prospects and motivations of war, which enhanced the film's plot. Hector's the man who steals the show here with a determined performance coming in from Eric Bana. Also, here's a fun fact. The arrows in this battle were real. Some scenes used real arrows fired from low poundage bows, and they had spongy soft tips to protect the actors. Unfortunately, not all of them worked, and some people suffered some minor injuries, and if I do remember correctly, they kept these shots in the film because they looked more realistic.
Give them nothing, but take from them everything. Stay!
If we're talking about the ancient ages, then 300 is bound to find its place somewhere. The battle between the Spartans and the Persians was sheer brilliance, and this one scene gave us a lot of insight into the kind of skills a man like Zack Snyder brings to the table. His sense of hyper-stylization can be seen in full flow over here, especially with the slow motion sequence where Leonidas goes to town on his opponents. The whole premise of 300 soldiers going up against tens of thousands of Persians is in itself an impressive feat, but to see these men flexing their muscles and their skills in such brutal fashion was a treat to the eyes. It's no surprise to see Braveheart take yet another position on this list, and it only makes sense for the first battle of Scottish independence to be in at number 2. It's bright and clear, which means it's easy to see the insanity happening in front of us. The camera angles are easy to work out, so you can follow the action perfectly. The close-ups are mixed in to show brutal details as well. It's essentially a masterclass in filmmaking. The fighting and the action choreography are all top-notch, just like the 23 entries before this one, but what stands out for me is the fact that Wallace comes out on top even after all that he's gone through. Strength and character always follow through, don't they? You've seen the Battle of Blackwater, so you knew the Battle of the Bastards was going to find its way out here, didn't you? The whole idea of creating TV shows was to offer more economical content to viewers, which could be consumed regularly. However, shows like Friends, The Sopranos and Breaking Bad started to turn the tide with their releases, and then of course, we had Game of Thrones, which took episode budgets to a whole other level. Of course, we all know how epic this sequence was, but are you aware of the insane production that went behind it? Okay, so for starters, the episode cost $11 million to make. Yeah, let that sink in for a minute. It took over 25 days to shoot, and on top of that, around 600 crew members, 500 extras, and 70 horses were involved. Like, the only thing missing here is Daenerys' dragons. Of course, we all wanted to watch Jon Snow beat the living daylights out of Ramsay, and we got to see that as a nice little bonus too. The whole zigzag game meme with Rick and Stark was probably the only odd aspect of the scene, but even then, this sequence stands out as a top-tier battle scene. I guess it all paid off in the end, didn't it? On that note, I sure hope House of the Dragon maintains its quality for Season 2. Hope you liked the video, please subscribe to the TV Regent, and here's another video that I know you'll enjoy.